Welcome everyone. This is one of over 250 talks on the history of Western art. I've arranged the talks chronologically. I start with cave art and work my way through to art produced in the last few years. This is section 20 on Neoclassicism, and this talk is on the French artist Jacques-Louis David. And this is his portrait of Napoleon, which I'll be discussing later. But first, his life. He was serious, intense, and immersed in the horrors and drama of the Revolution and Empire. He was born in 1748 in Paris to a prosperous family. His early childhood was marked by tragedy, when his father died in a duel when David was about 9 years old. This left a profound impact on him. He was raised primarily by his mother. He was exposed to an environment that valued education and the arts. He was trained in the arts, and in 1775 he won the prestigious Prix de Rome, which was an award that allowed promising young artists to study in Italy at the French Academy in Rome. And he spent 5 years there in Rome studying ancient Greek and Roman art, Renaissance masters and classical sculpture. Now, before he went to Rome, he was exploring the Rococo style, but on his return, he fully embraced Neoclassicism. Later, he became the artistic voice of the revolution, a friend of Robespierre, and even voted for the execution of Louis XVI. For example, a work I'm going to be showing you later, The Oath of the Horatii, became a symbol of patriotism. The death of Marat transformed a political assassination into a symbol of revolutionary martyrdom. This painting, this self-portrait, he painted in 1794 when he was 46, during one of the most turbulent phases of the French Revolution. He was a member and deputy to the National Convention. And what we see here is a sober, intense man confronting the consequences of revolutionary violence and political responsibility. And he painted this during the Reign of Terror, when the revolutionaries turned upon themselves. He was in fact arrested twice, and this was painted when he was in prison. But thanks to his friends and even his political opponents who campaigned for his release, he survived, and he became the official painter to Napoleon Bonaparte. You might wonder how he survived. Probably he was seen not as dangerous but as useful to the new regime, and he continued to paint even after Napoleon's fall and his exile to Brussels. And his influence on art shaped European art into the 19th century. He was an artist, he was a revolutionary, and he left behind a body of work that's visually stunning and historically significant. This is an early work, painted after he returned from Rome. It's Andromache Mourning Hector, and it shows the moment from Homer's Iliad when Andromache, who was widow of Hector, grieves over his dead body, and behind you see the devastated city of Troy. Now, Hector was Crown Prince of Troy and Commander-in-Chief of the army during the long 10-year siege by the Greeks. He was a heroic figure. He was admired by both Trojans and Greeks for his courage, nobility, and sense of duty. But he was killed by Achilles after being tricked by the goddess Athena, who appeared to Hector as his brother, offering to help him. After Achilles killed Hector, he dishonoured his body by dragging it behind a chariot around Troy's walls. Later, Achilles himself was killed by Hector's brother Paris, who shot an arrow into Achilles' heel, his one weak spot. The arrow was guided by another god, the god Apollo. The gods were divided. Some supported the Greeks, some supported the Trojans for various personal reasons. We see here the figures. They're monumental, they're sculptural. There's great composure, always dignity, rather than overt emotion. It's suppressed emotion, tightly controlled composition, reflecting the Enlightenment ideals of reason and moral seriousness. And this choice of subject reflects David's growing interest in history painting. History painting he used as a vehicle for teaching civic virtue through sacrifice and noble grief. And of course, as I said, it was influenced, this style, by the art he found in Rome. As I said, he spent 5 years there, and it was a crucial period in shaping his style for the rest of his life, this austere, classical style. And he completely rejected the frivolous Rococo style on his return. When he completed this work, The Oath of the Horatii, he was already an ambitious artist, but this work transformed him into the leading figure of French neoclassicism. It was commissioned by Louis XVI for the new salon space in the Louvre, and the painting was intended to promote themes of loyalty and duty. David chose a story from Livy's History of Early Rome. 3 brothers, the Horatii, were called upon to settle a war with the neighbouring city of Alba Longa by fighting their 3 champions, the Horatii, and victory would spare hundreds of lives, but the cost, of course, would be the brothers' own lives. And David is showing here a decisive moment. The father is holding out 3 swords, his arm rigid like a column. The brothers reach forward in unison to swear their oath. On the right, the women collapse in grief. One of the sisters of the Horatii was engaged to the enemy, a Curatius, and other sister-in-law, therefore, to both families. The painting is built with the clarity and balance of Roman architecture. You see 3 arches framing the picture and 3 emotionally distinct groups: duty, command, and sorrow. The composition, the detail is no accident. He spent hours studying and sketching the ancient ruins in Rome. He studied sculpture in Rome. He absorbed all the principles of classical design. Originally, David planned this picture as a chaotic battle-ready scene, but while in Rome, he saw the potential of stillness and restraint, and you'll see that in a lot of his paintings. By freezing the moment of commitment, he gives the work a sort of moral weight, and that appealed to both royal patrons and intellectuals. When it was exhibited in the Salon of 1785, it caused a sensation. It was read not only as a call to civic virtue, but by some, a veiled call for political reform. And in the years leading up to the French Revolution of 1789, this painting would be remembered as a turning point where art, politics, and history converged on one monumental canvas. This is the death of Socrates, 1787. It was a period of rising intellectual ferment in France. And what we see is the philosopher Socrates choosing to drink poison, hemlock, rather than compromise his principles. So it's a symbol of moral integrity, courage, and commitment to truth amid adversity. We see an orderly geometry in the composition. We see the calm, muscular figure of Socrates contrasting with the sorrow and agitation of his followers. And this is highlighting the triumph of reason over emotion. It was painted just a couple of years before the revolution, and it implicitly addresses issues of justice, law, and conscience, which were vigorously being debated at the time. Socrates' hand gesture is pointing towards the heavens, symbolizing transcendental ideals beloved by Enlightenment thinkers. The Stoic acceptance, the dramatic narrative, embodies the values that David admired and sought to propagate through his art. And it shows, of course, his mature and marked technical and intellectual maturity, reinforcing his already established position as the leading neoclassical artist in France. And this work foreshadowed many of his later works, featuring themes of sacrifice and civic virtue. This is another. The lictors bringing to Brutus the bodies of his sons. It was painted in 1789, and it shows a harrowing moment in Roman republican law. Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, founder of the Roman Republic, is shown sitting grimly in the foreground on the left. The bodies of his sons, who were condemned for treason, are brought in, and the painting dramatizes the tension between private grief and public duty, and it captures Brutus's stoic sacrifice for the state above his personal sorrow. Brutus overthrew the last king of Rome, to establish a republic. Soon after, there was a conspiracy aimed at restoring the monarchy, and it was found that Brutus's own sons were among the conspirators, and Brutus was bound by his commitment to republicanism and the rule of law. So he was compelled to condemn his sons to death for their betrayal. The painting doesn't depict the execution itself, but imagines the wrenching aftermath. The bodies of Brutus's sons are returned for burial by the lictors, the official Roman guards. Brutus sits in the shadows. Incidentally, just now, I think I might have given the wrong name. I should have said Lucius Junius Brutus. I think I might have said the name of the king that he overthrew, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus. But the person sitting there is Brutus. The wives and daughters are reacting in anguish, demonstrating the deep personal cost of civic duty. And this was a powerful allegory for late 18th century France. It was on the cusp at this point of revolutionary change. The severe classical forms, the sober tone, aligned with the spirit of political sacrifice promoted by revolutionary leaders. And David was by then deeply involved in revolutionary politics, increasingly supporting the Republic, and the painting stirred controversy, faced challenges when it was exhibited because of its political sensitivity, but it was an important call for republican virtue and the willingness to sacrifice for freedom. He, as you can see, has carefully arranged the grief-stricken women, highlit by the light coming through the door on the left, and the dark figure of Brutus sitting in the shadows, also on the left. The emotional cost of revolution and justice. David, we know, was aware the painting would resonate deeply in the charged atmosphere of 1789 Paris. And this is a demonstration of that charged atmosphere. This is his sketch of what's called the tennis court oath. Now, just a bit of background. France was divided into estates. The first estate was the clergy, the second estate, the aristocracy, and they made up only about 2% of the population. The vast majority of the population was the third estate, ordinary people, merchants, businessmen, professionals, and it was the third estate who paid most of the taxes. The clergy and the aristocracy were largely exempt. By this point, the country was almost bankrupt. The Controller General of Finances called an assembly of what he called notables and proposed increasing taxes on the nobility, the second estate. The second estate refused and suggested a general assembly of the Estates General, which hadn't met for 150 years. It finally met on the 5th of May 1789. It couldn't agree on the voting system, and the third estate declared themselves a national assembly. And on the 20th of June 1789, the third estate took what you see here, the tennis court oath, vowing not to separate and to reassemble wherever circumstances require until the constitution of the kingdom is established. It was a pivotal event in the French Revolution, inspired by a wide variety of revolutionary activity across the countryside. And in August, the following month, feudalism was abolished, and the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen was passed by the Third Estate, which by then was known as the National Constituent Assembly. Jacques-Louis David was commissioned to paint the scene of the tennis court oath, but financial difficulties and political reversals meant he was never actually able to finish the canvas. But this is the unfinished painting. This is an oil sketch for what was to be the final painting that was never completed. And what we see here are many of the early heroes of the tennis court oath, who later, during the Reign of Terror, became what were regarded as traitors of the state and were guillotined as the revolutionaries turned on themselves. David was one of the key supporters of the revolution. He was a friend of Robespierre. He, as I said, voted for the execution of Louis XVI, but he managed to survive through the Reign of Terror. This is someone who didn't. This is the death of Marat, painted in 1793, following his assassination. Now, Marat was a prominent radical journalist and politician. David and Marat were close friends, and Marat was murdered by Charlotte Corday while he was bathing. He had a skin condition, and he had to frequently bathe his skin to ease the pain. She used a letter as a sort of manipulative technique to gain access to Marat. And what David has done is transformed this scene into one of a secular saint or martyr of the revolution, using Christian iconographic parallels. The bathtub as a sort of altar, the bloodied knife, the calm martyred figure holding a letter. The letter reads, in translation, something to the effect, "I only need to be very unhappy to be entitled to your kindness." And the letter, in fact, with blood stains and water stains, still survives. We see a stark, minimalist composition, focusing attention on Marat's pale, emaciated body in order to invoke sympathy and revolutionary zeal. It became a potent propaganda for the Jacobins at the height of the terror. It encouraged political fanaticism and justified extreme revolutionary sacrifice. And David was deeply involved in all this revolutionary politics. And he was intentionally here immortalizing Marat's death in this dramatic, emotionally charged way. It remains one of the most famous and iconic images of political martyrdom in Western art. The intervention of the Sabine women of 1799, this is during the uneasy post-terror period of the French Revolution. This is a legendary episode from early Roman history. The Sabine women are intervening to stop a war between their Roman husbands and their fathers. And the painting is a powerful allegory for reconciliation, peace, and the restoration of social order after revolutionary chaos. David uses dynamic grouping. He's contrasting the aggressive postures of the men with the protective gestures of the women, symbolizing maternal love as a force for unity. The rocky background and the castle resemble the Bastille and the prison's ruins, a reference point to France's recent past. It was painted after David's own imprisonment and personal hardships. It can be read as a political statement and a reflection of his personal desire for harmony. It also connected to Napoleon's rise, representing the hope for stability under imperial rule. David laboured on this painting over 4 years, which highlights its importance to him. And it shows his shift from pure revolutionary propaganda towards a message of peace and social cohesion as France transitioned from revolution to empire. Painted the following year, 1800, this is a portrait of Juliette Récamier, and it captures an elegant socialite, a literary salon hostess, and she's shown amongst or in the refined cultural milieu of post-revolutionary Paris. She's reclining on a directoire-style sofa. She's wearing a white muslin gown inspired by classical Greek drapery, in tune with neoclassical fashions of the time. The background is sparse, the lighting is soft, and the focus is on her delicate features and graceful pose. Marks a departure, of course, from his monumental history scenes to an intimate, refined portrayal of contemporary high society. The austerity reflects the era's classical taste, mingled with an emerging empire style. It's said that Madame Récamier disliked the portrait. She thought it too severely simple, too restrained compared with her vivacious personality. Now we come to Napoleon. This was painted in 1800, 1801, after Napoleon's rise as first consul. It's Napoleon crossing the Alps. It's glorifying the military and political leader. It's a pivotal moment. It's celebrating his heroic crossing of the Alps to launch a surprise attack against Austrian forces in Italy. Now, in fact, he actually crossed the Alps slowly on a mule, but David has idealized the image, showing a heroic, calm Napoleon atop a spirited, rearing horse, commanding nature itself. It's a classical composition, very dramatic, a heroic equestrian portrait underscoring Napoleon's destiny and unrivaled leadership. It marks David's transformation into the official artist of the Napoleonic Empire, and he helped build this cult of personality around Napoleon. He actually painted multiple versions of this painting for various patrons across Europe. He intentionally and deliberately chose this heroic fiction to create a propaganda piece, and they were used, these propaganda pieces, to shape Napoleon's image as a military genius, which undoubtedly he was, but this was pushed forward and exemplified by this style of painting, showing him as the military genius and as saviour of France. This is an enormous painting. Look at the size. It's over 6 meters across. It's the coronation of Emperor Napoleon I and coronation of the Empress Josephine in Notre Dame de Paris, December the 2nd, 1804, painted in 1805-7. It shows the opulence and spectacle of this event in the Notre Dame. It's an official imperial propaganda piece, emphasizing Napoleon's secular supremacy over the church. David painted more than 100 figures, as you can see. He painted them with painstaking detail, including dignitaries, clergy, Napoleon, Josephine, showcasing imperial power and authority. Napoleon actually crowned himself. It was an act of self-coronation, a dramatic break from tradition, showing his control over his own destiny. Josephine is kneeling in an elegant pose, and the Pope Pius VII, is present. He is the one sitting down behind Napoleon, passive, reflecting the complex relationship between church and state. David took months of on-site sketches. He used multiple assistants due to the size and complexity of the work, and this work solidified his role as the premier court artist and an architect of Napoleonic visual propaganda. It remains one of the greatest examples of history painting from the Empire period. And this is the man, this is the Emperor Napoleon in his study at the Tuileries. Painted in 1812 when Napoleon was at the height of his power. It's an intimate portrait. He's shown alone in his study. He's working late. It's the familiar pose with his hand tucked inside his waistcoat, expressing authority and contemplative leadership. Incidentally, this hand in waistcoat pose was an 18th and 19th century convention. It was widely used by artists to communicate the ideals of leadership, dignity, and calm authority, and it's described in an etiquette book of the period and described as signifying manly boldness tempered with modesty. And the pose was actually recommended by the classical Greek orator Aeschines, and it was this painting that associated the pose so closely with Napoleon that we now associate this pose, I think, directly and exclusively almost with Napoleon. But in fact, you can find paintings of, for example, George Washington, Mozart, adopting the same pose. What we see here is something a bit different from the grand equestrian image we saw just now. This is a man consumed by governance and responsibility. He's surrounded by books, papers, a clock, symbolizing discipline and intellectual command amid the tumultuous times. David, as I said, was official court painter, and what he's done here is captured the psychological dimension of power and burden. He's created, using warm tones and subtle textures, an approachable yet imposing portrait. In order to paint this, it's said that David had privileged access to Napoleon during his long working days. Coming to the end of David's life, this was painted in 1817. David lived long enough to see Napoleon defeated at Waterloo in 1815 and die on St. Helena in 1821. David died 4 years later. And it's one of, not his final, but one of his final major paintings. It's Cupid and Psyche, and I'm showing it to show how his style matured in his later years. The austere history paintings we saw earlier have evolved into this softer, more romantic theme, grounded in classical mythology still. Created during his exile in Brussels after Napoleon's fall, it's more intimate and tender tone, depicting mythological lovers surrounded by luminous light, showing timeless human passion and beauty, graceful forms, a warmer colour palette. And David is using the story of Cupid and Psyche to explore the conflict between idealised love and physical reality. Cupid was a lover of the beautiful mortal Psyche and visited her nightly on the condition that she should not know his identity. Now, Cupid is usually shown as an ideal adolescent, but interestingly here, David presents him as this ungainly teenager smirking at his sexual conquest. We believe David took inspiration from a number of ancient texts, including an obscure and then recently published ancient Greek poem by Moschus that describes Cupid as a mean-spirited brat with flashing eyes and curly hair. Nevertheless, he shows his continued commitment to classical aesthetics and idealised beauty. And at this time, late in his life, he was influencing many young artists, and that underscored and created his legacy as a founder of modern French academic painting through this teaching in exile. One of his last paintings was Mars being disarmed by Venus. He began it in 1822 when he was 73, again in his exile in Brussels, and he worked on it for 3 years before he died in an accident in 1825. So Jacques-Louis David rose from an aspiring Parisian boy to the most influential neoclassical painter of the time. He was so closely intertwined with the political dramas of revolution and empire of Napoleonic France. His major artworks and stylistic evolution reflect his deep engagement with the ideals and upheavals of that period. Thank you for your time and attention. And goodbye for now. And I look forward to creating another talk for you soon.